Started. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone for today's Leadership Roundtable, The Power of Place, Addressing Urban Inequity Through Innovation and Design. I'm Vanessa Varden, the director of our recently renamed Pritzker Forum on Global Cities, the Council's signature cities event, co-hosted annually with the Financial Times and taking place this June 5 through 7. So mark your calendars. Registration for the forum will open in the next few weeks. So please be on the lookout for that if you enjoy our city's programming. Special thank you for the support of our President's Club members and invited guests. Your engagement with our city's work makes programs like these possible. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the council. Today's program is on the record and being recorded, but please do tweet using the hashtag GlobalCities2019 as well as @ChicagoForum. Our panelists will be in a moderated discussion for about 30 minutes, and then we'll turn the time over to the audience for 30 minutes of moderated Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question today, if you can just take your name tent and flip it upwards, that will give our moderator here a visual cue that you have something to contribute to the conversation, and she will call on you in order. Please do wait for a microphone that looks like this to come to you from one of our staff members that will help with the recording that we're doing. I hope you've had a chance to view our speakers and moderators' biographies prior to this, but please allow me to highlight some of their notable achievements. Gerben van Straaten is the founder of World of Wallace. With over 25 years of experience in urban development and redevelopment, he has worked on the development of over 150 projects across 4 continents, from First Nations communities to mixed-use urban complexes. He is also author of the Earth Charter Cities Manifesto and Special Commissioner of Earth Charter. Andrea Zopp is the president and CEO of World Business Chicago. She previously served as Deputy Mayor, Chief Neighborhood Development Officer for the City of Chicago. In addition to her public service, she has held executive leadership positions at several Fortune 500 companies, and she is appointed to the Chicago Board of Education and the Cook County Health and Hospital System Board. And finally, our moderator, Elena Harkness, is a non-resident fellow on Global Cities here at the Council and is a community and economic development expert. She serves as the managing director at RW Ventures and is the co-founder of Civicana, a strategy advisory consultancy. She is widely published and serves on the advisory boards of the Global Parliament of Mayors, the City Tech Collaborative, Urban Initiatives, and Margaret's Village. So with that, thank you all for being here today, and I'd like to turn it over to Elena to begin the discussion.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks to all of you for braving the polar weather here in Chicago and coming out for this conversation. I guess it's because it's such a great topic. So transformative placemaking. To me, this is why I got involved in the community and economic development field. It's what's motivated me for years. It's the idea that we can build the cities that we hope to have using the building blocks of the cities we live in today. And that's an exciting prospect. The idea that we can use this set of tools that we are today talking about as placemaking as a way to transform cities. I can't think of a more exciting topic. And we've got 2 wonderful people here to engage with in this conversation. I want to just provide a tiny bit of framing. Transformative placemaking has the potential to be exciting, but also can sound a little bit dry and wonky. Transformative placemaking, what does that mean? So I looked to some experts who do this for a living on a day-to-day basis, and the Project for Public Spaces, which is a US-based placemaking institute, refers to placemaking as a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize shared value. So I want to highlight a couple of things from this definition that I think are key and that we're going to unpack with our panelists today. The first is collaboration. This is important because there's almost no space in any city that is truly kind of public, truly private, truly nonprofit. We are always co-building our cities across sectors, across disciplines, with each other, across communities all the time. So collaboration becomes kind of a first principle of any transformative placemaking, any urban planning, any urban development. So I want to probe that today and think about what it means to collaborate, how we do it effectively, what are some of the vehicles that help structure, support, and sustain it. Placemaking is a process, so we'll talk a bit about that today. What are some of the steps and the sequence of what makes placemaking effective? And then this notion of public realm I also think is really interesting. The idea that transformation and placemaking are about something that we collectively do together to make public spaces in cities that are worth spending time in and spending time around. So the idea of public that shares the benefits of cities is, I think, something that is tied up in this set of questions about what we choose to do, what our priorities are, who we engage, and how we share the benefits. And finally, the notion that this is all about maximizing shared value, I think this is probably the most important take-home point today, and the reason I'm so glad that I've got Gerben and Andrea here to talk with us, because both of them have been deeply invested in building across sectors and thinking about how to deliver shared value to cities, their citizens, their residents. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Both of you, I'd like to ask us kind of an opening here for each of you to say a little bit about the values that have driven your practice of placemaking. Each of you start. And Gerben, would you start and tell us a bit about the world of Wallace and the guiding values that kind of anchor your transformative placemaking practice?
Gladly. And first of all, thank you for the invite and having me here from Holland, giving a perspective maybe towards this great city of Chicago. You know, what drove me to try and do a different way of placemaking and urban development is actually the involvement in the traditional urban development. You know, leading up to the world crisis that we had in 2008, 2009, especially in Europe, first financial and then the big real estate crash. You know, leading up to that, I always felt, you know, that everything's focused on statistics and developments, and that's not how I like to work. Because what you want to create is places where people live, where they can reinvent themselves forever. So, you know, it really starts after you finish the development. And that's also why we decided to be very different. I started a new group of companies then, that was in 2010. There's 30 of them right now, varying from local companies, new energy companies, new waste management. So I think all those things are very important if you really look at urban areas. And, you know, one of the things where we're really different is we're a company that's first in, last out. If we really like to be part of a certain community, our company does not sell what it creates. So we're neighbors. We're in the community. So we have to understand the community on all levels. We always build a local company that does it. We're not going to manage anything from Amsterdam or Vancouver. If we're going somewhere, we're going to be there. And I think those things sometimes seems logical, but in the development world, they're really not. So that's where it started for us. And you know, we've been very successful finding new business models, new finance models to do this in different countries. So we're also hopeful that we can bring that more to North America as well.
Great. Andy?
So I think this is actually perfect. We're a good balance because I came at it, so Gerben came at it from more a business perspective and using business and business strategies to build neighborhood. I came at it from the other end, from community and neighborhood development. So for me, it started when I was at the Urban League, and the Urban League, Chicago Urban League, is part of the National Urban League, an affiliate of the National Urban League, focused on, in short, strengthening African-American communities. And we do that through a wide variety of service delivery, but also advocacy and policy work. But what I was seeing there is really the challenges, the importance and the layering and the very different levers in neighborhood development. and the challenges that so many people in our city face in not having strong neighborhoods. So I live in the 19th Ward, a neighborhood called Beverly. Beverly has kind of all the pieces that you would want in a strong neighborhood. We have mixed housing, we have affordable housing, we have all the way up to large-scale mansions, we have good schools, we have a strong local neighborhood-based economy where your kids can walk down the street and find a place to go to work. We have good parks, and it's pretty safe. And so my question really was, why? What are the pieces, and why are we not doing that? Why can't everyone here have that in their neighborhood? Because if you don't have it, if you don't have access to affordable housing, if you don't have a good school in your neighborhood, if you don't have a strong local economy, it becomes really impossible it has an impact on all kinds of life, including length of life. And so started looking at how we can impact that both from the Urban League level and then ultimately at the city level.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I heard a number of key values really important here, but one, the sort of long-term vision, two, this sort of comprehensive look at what it means to build quality of life in cities, everything from having a housing, kind of stable housing situation to job opportunities to a healthy environment, the way those things all come together, I think we'll talk about a bit more as we go on, but also the idea of being locally grounded, of having leadership that's rooted and has a long-term stake in investment seems to be really important. So I'd like to hear each of you unpack a little bit of the details of how you got this done by walking through some of like a 1 or 2 slide version of an emblematic project, something that you're really proud of, that you've worked on, that you think represents a placemaking project that's going well.
Shall I start?
Sure.
Well, maybe it's the first project that we started after we decided to be very different. And it was a project in the south of Holland, former coal mining area, average 30% unemployment for 3 generations because, it was really hard to find new industries there. Very depressed people, not just because economically, but also mentally. They were really thinking that, no chance would really help them. What the Dutch government did to help them is build the National Statistics Office there, but nobody was trained for being a statistician there. So they brought people from the west over to the south. Nobody wanted to live there, so it took about 10 years for all those people to move back. So this very big building in the center of the city was empty. Mm-hmm. And so they needed new plans for that. Nobody dared to touch it. It was not the best building either. And then they asked us, do you think your new approach might work? And then, we went into a 500,000 square feet office building and said, we're going to do something new. We keep a little bit of office zoning and give me a little bit of everything. It should be mixed use, and we will start a socioeconomic development first. We're not going to chase people away. It's not useful to just bring higher class people in. We need to do something for the people that are already here. We will start creating jobs around what they need. We will only do local business. We started a business model which we call the School of Fish. We really believe that big groups of small companies are very, very strong. And in the beginning...
School of Fish?
The School of Fish, big groups of small fish. And in the beginning, all our banks said, well, that's unbankable. But we're 5 years later, now they give us higher cap rates than anybody else in the industry, especially in Germany. What happened is when we started, 500,000 square feet of the building was empty. We started a creative cluster of creative companies. There are 130 now that came to the south, that work there. We have a little bit of office. We do farm to future, so urban. We really believe that thinking about food production inside the cities and food distribution inside the cities is important, so we brought that in. There's 1,200 jobs now for people that really needed the jobs, all from the local area. No big companies, no franchises came in, so it's all local. 400 new jobs in that situation. Again, the biggest hub for innovative, creative companies. A lot of collaborations around that, and the other thing is with the economic success that's really based on cash flows. We started creating an ecological project. So because when we started, the natural gas bill was about €1 million a year, and now we're off-grid. We build our own solar company, we'll build our own biomass company, we distribute our own waste. It's very effective. We could be off-grid if the government would allow us that. But it's very successful. We thought we were lucky in that area, but a lot of people tried. But we tried it in other locations too, and we've been just as successful in other places.
And if people wanted to learn more about that, where's the best
you
site?
can go to worldofwallers.com and look at our projects. The project is called Carbon 6.
Carbon
and
6,
there's
right.
an energy project around Carbon 6 called Carbon Blue.
Great, Carbon Blue. Excellent. So this is a project that started from a building problem. Like you had this large space. What do we do with the space? How can we think about the highest and best use of that space? At World Business Chicago, you often start from a different standpoint with the question of what is the next growth opportunity for the city? What does the economy need? How do we think about creating the right kind of vehicle? Can you share a little bit about a project that has been kind of transformative placemaking, but leading with an economic challenge?
Yeah, so I would start with, so really when I was in the mayor's office doing neighborhood development. So the mayor asked me to come into the mayor's office to lead our the cities to kind of try and herd the cats on the city's neighborhood development efforts. And the reason for that was the mayor had been making a fair number of investments at the neighborhood level, but was having a hard time getting any consistent impact, both at the community level in terms of people feeling like there was a difference from these investments, but also from kind of sustainability. So we started looking at a couple of things. One was strategy, which was the city was making investments. City was making investments in parks. City was making investments in libraries. City was making investments in roads, but they weren't doing it very strategically. So what I always say about the city is we're very collaborative. Like if you call somebody on the phone and go, hey, I'm going to go do this, will you help me? They'll be like, sure, I'll help. But we're not very coordinated. So if you don't call, then they're just going. I mean, literally, putting in pipe after we've repaved a road, not coordinated really at all. And then also we weren't doing a particularly good job of engaging people at the neighborhood level in what was happening. So what that feels like is we just show up, we build a nice park, we don't ask anybody, how are you going to use it? What do you want? What do you think it should look like? And then when it's done, we have a nice press conference and we go, hey, look, there's a great park we built for you, bye. And not thinking about kind of the overall impact. So I would say we started thinking about it way more strategically a while ago, and I picked several, but the neighbors one I would talk about at first is Bronzeville. And I talk about it because that's where the Urban League is, in Bronzeville. And when I was at the Urban League, one of the things, there's a giant housing apartment complex called the Rosenwald Apartments. And when I started the Urban League in 2010, it was empty. And by giant, I mean it's basically, if this was a city block, it's a full city block of apartments on the corner of 47th and Michigan and Wabash, and then 46th. It was apartments. It was built by Rosenwald as the first really affordable housing for African American families. It was amazing. It had families. It was incredible. It was empty. There was a forest growing inside this place, and it had been empty for an incredibly long time. And it used to just make me crazy when I would drive by and go, like, we got to do something about these apartment buildings. In the meantime, the city started making some other investments in Bronzeville, in Ellis Park there, and then the city started building. One of the other challenges with Bronzeville is, despite the fact that it's just a mere few blocks from the lakefront, there was no direct access for residents of Bronzeville to the lakefront. There was no walking access. So the mayor was working with CDOT, started planning to rebuild some footbridges. So that was happening as well. And then there were a number of other city strategies that I can talk about later, including Neighborhood Opportunity Fund and Retail Thrive Zones, that were going to deal with investments at the commercial level. So for example, as these things started happening, we started having conversations with the community. So we rebuilt this big, huge park there. Before we did all of that, we had conversations with the community about, what do you want? What do you think in the park? So they were very engaged. So when the park opened, it was their park, not the park district's park. We also started having conversation. The other thing that the mayor was very focused on was food deserts. They had not had a new grocery store in Bronzeville in some significant period of time. We had been starting to have some conversations with Mariano's. Mariano's built, and there was a grocery store there. There is a grocery store there, a Jewel, 39th and State. It's horrible. I mean, it's just a really not a good store. And so we got Mariano's to come and build a new, a brand new Mariano's anchor store. It's incredible, and it is. And this really goes to what Gerben was saying. This store was so necessary and needed for the neighborhood that the developers of the store sold it within a month for a huge profit. And the store is incredibly thriving right now. And my point to that is this was a neighborhood we couldn't get people to come to, but when you start the city's making investments, and then you have the city leading the conversation with private developers, they change their attitude, and then all of a sudden they're there and they realize, oh my God, there's also a huge middle class community here and people who will spend money. And so, so I started with the Rosenwald to say, because those other things started happening, we were also working with private developers and the CHA to redevelop the Rosenwald. And I'm really proud to say right now that 2 years ago, 18 months ago, we reopened the Rosenwald as a part CHA housing, part it's mixed-use development, mixed-use housing, and then it has commercial development all on 47th Street that is almost completely full now. So a building that was a forest, a commercial corridor that was empty, and now as part of, and then you walk down 47th, you can walk down and now get to the lakefront at the park. There's now 2 bridges. There's a new bridge coming up at 39th. It's either 39th or 41st.
Right.
That's taken several years, but all of those things are building. Also happens neighborhoods very close to downtown, which is a challenge, right? Because it's now gentrifying, and there's some gentrification issues, and we have to talk about how we're going to address that. But the neighborhood is changing, and those investments change how people think about their neighborhood as well, particularly when you engage the community in the development that's happening.
So that's a great example. I think this ties right into the very topical, hot-button issue around development incentives. And it's interesting, I hadn't thought of this, but I mean, Julius Rosenwald was Sears Roebuck, right? An early retail giant in Chicago. And now when we think about Amazon, another retailer, and their headquarters location and the role that these sort of retailers are playing in placemaking.
But Julius Rosenwald was also a community development innovator.
Yes.
Right? So the Rosenwald Apartments, the new schools that he built, where he built schools, which were obviously critical parts of community development, because you can't really develop the community if they're not educated.
Take a page. Jeff Bezos could take a page out of that book. Yes, and think about what to do in these future developments. I want to ask about what makes for a well-designed development incentive. Obviously, there are neighborhoods where we have said there needs to be a development finance playbook that helps to attract private investment, to become catalytic, and to be part of the sort of flywheel of transformation around this placemaking. What makes for an incentive that works well, that gets community sort of engaged in at the table, and that leads to outcomes that help to kind of balance this dynamic of development without displacement?
I can only speak from my own experience. A lot of that is in Europe, and I know it's a little bit different, and sometimes it's also not that different if you really look at how cities work. But when we started to do things differently, and we're always in there for the long term, that changed a lot of things for us as a business too, which means that basically a lot of our values got closer to the city's values as well.
Yeah.
You know, for us, it's very important that if we stay somewhere, that we keep building the values of all the people that live there, their capabilities, you know, the way that they develop themselves, that they seize their opportunities. That's a constant drive for us, because if they do better, actually, we know how to capture some of that value for ourselves and build better neighborhoods. So if you then start to work with cities and they have their investment programs, you know, for us it's a little bit silly that they would give us to us to create buildings. That's just the black and white. So what we told them, you know, use that to create reliable tenants for us, because it's the same for us. Actually, sometimes if you get the right cap rates, it's actually a multiplier. You know, if you do it right, instead of using the dollar once, we might use it 1.5 times. And then also what we try to do is, if you do that, you can also look at, if you try to create smaller businesses that do well, why can't they go to their own bank? And that's what we found out in a lot of cities. The bank, if you talk to the bank will say, my risk is too high with the small companies.
Yep.
Then I asked, how much too high is your risk? They said, maybe 30% or 50% or 40, whatever it was. Then I said, well, why don't we use the government fund to just secure your risk? And we'll manage the people in our areas, so you will be able to follow them. And that led to, a collaborative program with us as a placemaker and developer for the longer term, and the cities and the banks, to whatever was available from us and the cities, that we multiplied that at least with a factor 3 to 5.
And here in Chicago, so the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund was structured as a mechanism to help incent development.
Well, so that's really, I think the point is, there's kind of two, what you're talking about. You're trying to incent businesses to come in and invest, which is really what Gerben was talking about, and where I think the important piece about what he was saying was really addressing, we tend to do incentives to go, here's some money, come in and invest, we'll cut your costs, but we don't think about your business, your longer-term business model, and will that work in this community? So what he said was, get me reliable tenants. I don't need the money to cut my costs to build it, but I do need a sustainable set of income to run the building. And so I think thinking through incentives in ways that, if you're putting in, when the city did the Whole Foods in Inglewood, we put a lot of money in workforce and ensuring that they would have a strong workforce, and in educating the community on how to shop at a Whole Foods, right? Because it's different from what they're used to. So I think, because again, if people don't come, we can incent them to build it, but if it's not sustainable for them, it will not be there. So there's that piece. But the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is doing this, and this again, this is where you're thinking strategically about neighborhood development. It's great if I can put the Whole Foods there, or if I can put the Mariano's there, that's great. But if we don't have smaller businesses as well, that's only one piece of the development, community development pie. So what the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund does is support, drive dollars from, and then it addresses two issues. First of all, it helps support small businesses, but it also, we have this challenge, and we get a lot of criticism here in Chicago, because our central business district is growing, and it's growing, well, what I like to say, it's organic growth, right? I don't have to do much, right? I have to go, hey, we're here, and people come because there's a whole lot of other reasons. We don't incent businesses to come into the central business district, and we shouldn't have to. The challenge is that what do you do with all that growth, and how do you better connect that to the neighborhood? The Neighborhood Opportunity Fund does that. So companies that are growing organically, in the areas that are growing organically and want to increase their density, and they take that money that used to go into investments around those developments. So it's why, for example, you see all these buildings with beautiful plazas and big green trees in their lobbies. That's what the money used to go to. Now we take that money, 80% of it, and put it in a fund that goes directly to small businesses in challenged neighborhoods where the growth and the investment is not organic, it's inorganic. You have to do things to get money into those communities and into those businesses. And so you're literally tying the growth of the city, the central business district, into, in a very literal way. So the McDonald's headquarters came into the city, $4 million into the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund that went to small businesses located outside of the city. The challenge, and I think kind of the next level there, is to make sure that the small businesses can deploy the capital that is now available to them, and they're having real challenges with it. We're addressing them, but that is the next issue. But if you do that, you do that well. So, for example, one of the and I think they're going to actually officially open next week, one of the new businesses in the commercial area of the Rosenwald is a Neighborhood Opportunity. It's open. This is a business that has already had a business in Bronzeville, opening up a second business in the front of the Rosenwald on 47th Street. Just down the street is an art gallery that received Neighborhood Opportunity Fund money to expand their gallery, the outside part of their gallery. So we're literally rebuilding, taking money from downtown development to help rebuild 47th Street.
To your earlier, both your earlier points about the need to make sure you have strategic co-location of these assets to really make sure that you're, reinforcing them. How do you think about making sure that those neighborhood opportunity fund investments are both responsive to where neighborhoods have demand, but also that you're clustering those investments? And I want to tie that to this other very hot topic conversation about opportunity zone funding and the way we kind of strategically allocate that development incentive.
Some of it is it's twofold. Some of it is part of the application. Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is a broad application, so some of it's part of how you define the areas. We have a number of Neighborhood Opportunity Fund businesses that are not on kind of in these correlated areas, but that's a plus factor in the application. The other thing is that the city uses neighborhood-based partners, community development organizations to help identify businesses and help identify the stronger businesses, the businesses that they're working with to say, this business coming will make a difference here. So we use them in assessing the application pool as well.
To be your local anchor.
Right.
Yep. Great. Well, I want to make sure we have time. I know this is an audience that's going to have questions, so I think I want to be thinking about your questions. If you don't have them already, I will keep asking these folks to engage around this, but think about it. Make sure you turn your card up, right? Upright? Great. I'd love to know a little bit about how you keep this collaborative conversation happening. So you have a lot of different players, public and private, civic, nonprofit, the community. What are some of the institutions that you set up or the tables that you're setting to kind of have these collaborative conversations sustain for the long-term engagement that you need to make these projects successful? Gerben, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, again, I'm in several countries and several cities, and it's different everywhere.
Sure.
Whenever I come in and think, this was very successful in that city, even in Holland, in the south, and I go to a city in the north and I try to blueprint that, that's a sure way to fail.
Yep.
So what we really learned is, basically you have to talk to everybody. If you're really in a community, you talk to your neighbors, your first neighbors first. That's what we always do. Of course, we talk to the mayor, and if you have big plans, there's planning involved, although at first we always like to start to economic affairs first. That's what we try to create, the social part, and then we'll think about, how does that fit planning? But once we are there and people learn about us, we talk to our neighbors first because I think it's polite. It's the people that we deal with every day. And I also, from a background in the east of Holland, we have a little bit of a different culture. It was almost tribal, but in our system where I grew up, neighbors had to take care of each other. That was law. 6 neighbors to each side of you, and that. But it also meant that we really know about collaboration. And saying I'm from Holland, we're also in the urban development because we really believe that cities are the solution for our future. They always have been. Cities create our problems, but they also find ways to solve our problems. And this is one of my big drivers. And being from Holland, 2,000 years we live 40% below sea level. And I can tell you, we learned that building a dike in front of your own house doesn't work. And you have to talk to your neighbors and the next neighbors and the next village. I can also tell you that, in this situation, there's many sea levels. We have the carbon levels, we have the fine pollution, we have a lot of issues. And I can also tell you that, if we now wait for the Germans to build a dike in front of their own house, it doesn't help them, it doesn't help us if we're not doing the same thing. And this goes from global to very local. And that's why I believe in collaborations, and it's a lot of issues. Me as a business person, I really can't solve it. I'm imperfect, by design, but I think the government is too. And I think the neighborhood is too. If we're not going to work together, we cannot solve the ways that we can really bring to the future. And I really believe that if you have a longer-term vision, our role becomes a little bit more governmental too. We represent big groups of neighbors. We engage with them. We have long terms. We invest in public space a lot. We in healthy environments because it's our interest too. And on the other side, cities have become more entrepreneurial as well. They have to think about others. So I think that collaboration, and I've called it collaborate or die. I really believe on all levels that's where the difference is.
But in this case, you are the convener. World of Wallace is the convener, the developer, partner. You are setting these tables, sparking this collaboration, having these conversations, right?
Well, yes.
Appearing
so
at these tables?
when we started, yes, but our new big projects is where actually cities ask us to come in.
Yep.
The last big projects that we had in Germany is this city used to be steel industry and coal mining industry. It's all gone, and then it was in Germany. So the beer industry was very big too. So that's still alive.
Yeah.
But anyway, but all the rest is gone. Then they founded universities. They trained high level people. But the reputation of the area was not that good. So all their talent left. So they came to us and said, what you're doing in your projects, how can we use that to keep our talent? So, our whole economic plan was talent capture, the right age, then, do it at the right time. So if they grow, you really grow the economy of the city. We really believe in those local companies because it's local jobs. It's for old people, young people, for women, for men. Everybody's involved. Creating the public spaces around that. That's the wide plan. So basically, now the initiative is more cities that want our approach than us taking a chance and approaching the cities to find places.
And the reason I ask is because it matters so much who's convening, especially, from place to place, it matters, the local politics and conditions, but also I think some of the most effective conveners in this space around placemaking now are these kind of hybrid developers that have kind of taken on some of the functions of a civic intermediary or nonprofit, and these kind of interesting blended institutional forms that just do a good job of having the mission, leading with the values, and then building trust and setting the table. But I imagine it was hard as you were building this without the track record you now have to kind of come in as a developer and try to have these conversations.
Yes, as soon as people label you as a developer, you have a different discussion.
Yeah.
And luckily, people don't.
Yeah.
People really think that we're something different. So, they call us an investor, sometimes a developer, but they don't know what we really are. But because we're also pretty complex.
Yeah.
But what I tell them, we're in here for sustainable urban development.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes, we're first in, last out. So whatever, we're a developer in some part of the chain. We're an investor in some part of the chain. We're an asset manager, but, we're part of it and we will never go. And that's also... if you compare that, especially to European governments, where, in some of our local governments, there's 17 parties involved. Every 4 years, I have to deal with probably another mayor or another party or another vision. So, sometimes actually us staying there for the long term is for our community is actually their commitment more than their own politicians.
Right. So that's a timely topic here in Chicago, where we are in the middle of an electoral cycle ourselves. But I wonder, Andy, if you could say a little bit about some of the most important civic table setting that happens here to sustain this long-term planning.
The important thing that, about what Gerben said is that it's, he's phrased it as collaborate or die, but I think the important thing is it's got to be continual.
Yeah.
And I think it's also tends to be better and more impactful when you have something very specific to talk about. When we've done a lot of, yes, you do have to have community plans, you don't have to have them, but they're helpful. But we've done a lot of that over a really long period of time. You can pick
of
community planning,
Yep.
of neighborhood development plans, and in fact, and that's what makes people crazy. They're like, 10 years ago, we built this plan and said we wanted that. It hasn't been done yet.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to where if you go in and you go, okay, this came out of that plan you did 10 years ago, or these 3 things, here's what we're going to do. Now tell us how you want us to do this specific thing. And then when you do that, by the way, you bring the private partners, you bring the public partners as well. And so, but you're working on towards a more specific goal so that you can see an outcome in their lifetime, not, a decade later, and the overall outcome may be a decade later, but there will be short-run wins. And I think that becomes really important, because I think when we have these generic, the other thing that happens in these generic kind of community planning things is everybody just comes in with the stickies and goes, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I'd love to have this. And of course you would. They want all the things I talked about, right? And having a great neighborhood, right? But that, first of all, nobody's talking about how you're going to fund it. Where is it going to come from? Whereas you come in with some specific concepts.
Right.
When we were talking about redoing the Rosenwald, we were redoing the Rosenwald. So then the question was, what should it look like? How are we going to fund it? Where's the financing? And the community was engaged in that conversation, so they understood some of the challenges, but they also knew what it was going to be when it was done. So it wasn't like a big surprise. You go, oh, look, surprise, here's what it is. And so, but they also understood some of the hard parts to making that happen. So I think the point is you have to collaborate all the time, but I also think the more focus you can get on specific objectives, an actual project or development as opposed to the generic plan, has been for us a more effective outcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point. I think it's one of the things that's fueling so much interest in this idea of placemaking, because it is more, it can be seen as concrete. It might be a parklet or a very small intervention, or it could be a very large redevelopment of a university campus or something else. But the idea that there are short wins that fuel the long-term engagement, I think, is a really critical one. So we do have questions. I can't see your name, so if you would just wait for a microphone right over here. Great.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Allison Tingwall. I'm part of the Emerging Leaders cohort here at CCGA, and I'm a principal in Chicago Public Schools and high school. And I was surprised a little bit that the word school never got brought up in this conversation. Of course, we're talking about economic impacts. But my question is, you talked a lot about collaboration, but as you told some of the stories, it kind of came off as collaboration for the sake of the economic benefit, or the development coming into those neighborhoods for the economic collaboration. How do we get the development to come in and also support community collaboration in terms of honoring not just the space but the people, and the people that were there, and investing not just in the economy but investing in the people simultaneously? What policies could we maybe put in place in addition to drawing the businesses that also draws companies into the schools, the nonprofit community partners, the park district?
So I'm not 100% certain that I understand the question, but because I think my conversation was all about talking about community engagement. We were talking about neighborhood development. If you're talking about school development, we can do that. They're not completely different things, but they're a little bit different processes. But there are, engaged in those community groups that I'm talking about. The schools are there. The principals are there. The leaders of the local school councils are sitting at those tables about what do you want in the park? What do you want in your new school? I'm not, and perhaps I just didn't articulate it well. My process is inclusive of all the partners that I would tell you in the community. It was not focused on how do we do school development as well, which is of course a related process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think, let me clarify, thank you, because I obviously wasn't clear in the way. So if I think of some examples in Chicago, think of Pilsen or Logan Park, where we've had good economic development. From the Chicago Public Schools perspective, we're not quite seeing increase in enrollment in the schools in those neighborhoods, but we are seeing what a lot of people would think superficially looks like a lot of success in that area. So are there examples that you've worked on, or are there policies that we can do where both can benefit simultaneously?
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So I think, our long-term goal is certainly to bring people back to these neighborhoods who would then be part of the schools, and part of that is having strong schools. I'm actually surprised to hear what you said about Pilsen and the schools not seeing increased enrollment, and we should, if you want to have an offline conversation. We have neighborhoods where I think we are seeing some increased enrollment, and part of that is you have to improve the schools, and the CPS has been doing a fair amount of work of doing that. In Bronzeville, we have have a number of schools that are, I wouldn't say over-enrolled, but are that where the enrollment is improving. So I think part of that is really, but where I'm challenged is when we're doing kind of neighborhood community development particularly from an economic, how do we draw and build kind of that economic base? I don't want to step into your space, right? So for example, like, I don't know that you want a developer telling you how to fix your school. So I think the question is, what from your perspective as a principal would be the helpful engagement, right? And maybe we need to be asking those questions as well. But if we're not bringing, I think my assumption kind of is if we build a community where people want to come and live, the schools will prosper. So I kind of view that as kind of a related, an automatic plus. What I'm hearing from you is that that's not happening, at least in some neighborhoods. And so we need to rethink through my assumption's wrong, and I need to rethink it.
Can I comment on this?
Yes, please.
Of course, I cannot comment on your specific situation, but for us it is really important. Of course, economics are important, also because we don't get any government funding in our projects. So you have to find an economic base to sustain anything in our community. All the social sides, including helping schools, helping elders. So that's why we have to understand the economic opportunities in a certain area as well, because we want to do it for the people that live there, not people that might come in, not to develop something where we gentrify a whole community. 80% of the people that lived in a place where we started still live there after we have upgraded, and they upgraded with us. Again, if you allow me to do one quick sample, I'll go very quick. It was an old industrial area, and we had to revive that. People around that were really impoverished. So I had to really look and what can we do there and understand how things worked. One of the things I did is that the city was looking for a location for a small modern art museum. I said, I will give you the building if you bring it here, you pay your rent, I will give you a theater too. In the meantime, I already knew that the big theater in the city, they were really struggling with their small shows. If they wanted to buy shows for the theater, they had to buy 4 big ones, 4 medium ones, 4 small ones. The small ones, they always lost money on that. I said, give me the small ones. I will deal with that in my small theater. I got all the schools involved in their training programs. If electrical engineering, all the interns were in that theater. So, I had a double business model on that too. And then I also learned there was a third thing, is that, around us was an institution for people with Down syndrome. They all had their daily budgets. And I said, do you want to be actors instead of going to, your daycare? And, a lot of them really wanted to be actors. So I give you a job as an actor. So, we had 15 people with Down syndrome in an acting group, and they started to use their budget every day in that theater as well. And we found jobs for them for commercials in TV shows. But the other thing what happened too is, as a byproduct, is that, now the people with Down syndrome were trained every day to use their brains and study a new play. And after 5 to 10 years, we discovered that this group of people with Down syndrome was the only one in the country that didn't suffer from dementia. So it was a byproduct. But those social aspects for us are really important to keep the whole fabric of a certain community alive. But what we're really good at is, trying to find those economic opportunities to bring everything together and to stack them in a certain place where actually, because of that collaboration, everybody thrives.
Right.
Not everything succeeds, but that's what we try to make happen. So the economics are important, but the whole structure of creating a vibrant community comes first.
Yeah, and that's a pretty exceptional case to be able to bundle and all of those different components in one, to see that come to life in one development. Kellen, I think, was next. You've got behind you a mic.
Kellen Harris, I'm with CMAP, a city planner with our regional planning agency. Thanks for the examples that you supplied, particularly around projects, and you talked a bit about incentives. I feel like there's sort of a paradox. A lot of our incentives in the Chicago region, at least, are to support retail development. And we're finding that retail is weakening, dying in many cases. We're seeing Target leave, Sears, Marshalls, leaving these huge voids in our communities. First of all, 2 parts. How do you activate those communities that have now lost these anchors, these assets, these huge job generators. And then, also, how do you find alternatives to retail to activate these communities? Because when you look at a long-term sustainability side, retail may not be the solution for the long term.
Right.
I think the developer should go first.
Yeah. And just keep these answers. I do want to hear from everybody, so we'll take all the rest of the questions in a round after this, and you can respond. Thanks.
Of course, this is part of the sign of the times, and we cannot solve all the retailers' problems, and especially because they created them themselves by going online as well. That's the new reality. But the way that we did is there's a couple of things where we at least can repair some of that. First, go back to mixed use in every location where we are. Focus on the local businesses, because competing with the big chains. Where they are also online, that's very hard. Also, they on average have very big units. So if one fails, a very big thing fails. So what we try to get back is, try to get maybe 20, 30 small ones and make sure that they can really survive, that they have the environment where they survive. And we learned a lot of things too. For instance, in a certain area, we learned that if you have 7 shoe shops and you have an 8th and a 9th, they all do better. If you try to do that same with website developers, they all do worse. So, you have to build up a lot of knowledge for that local business development. But at least we've been able to repair some of that. And the old way of having, the retail streets in your old cities with all the big chains and all the franchises, I think that will suffer and that will keep suffering, but you have to try to reinvent the reason why people go there. And I think we can only do it with local businesses that are new every week, with the mixed use, and build it from there.
The only thing I would add to that is I think you also have to think through, are there other commercial uses that also have benefits to the community? So, for example, we're looking at whether or not we could do create a coding, train returning citizens in coding, which you can do from anywhere, right? And then create a WeWorking kind of space in one of these places where they can go, you give them an office, everybody just goes, they code, nobody cares, doesn't matter what necessarily their personal background is. If you can train them to do it, they can do it from anywhere. Could we do that in one of these larger spaces and create a workspace? And is there something like that or some other alternative, something where, because, people are working now from anywhere. So can we do that? Are there particular pathways of work that you could create there, particularly also open it up to people that would be non-traditional? So you can kind of, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. That's just one, whether, and haven't proven it to be workable yet, but we're looking at it. But the point is thinking through a different way to use the space, but also that adds some economic value back to the neighborhood. And by that, by economic value, I mean to the individuals who live there, who can then contribute back in, right? Because if they're making money there, they'll shop there, they'll rent there, they'll contribute back. So the dollars continue to circulate in the neighborhood.
Community. Yep. So we have Shane, Sarah, Rule, and I can't see your name. Emmanuel, great. So if you'd all say your question, and then we'll try to see if there's any overlap in response.
So mine is kind of a follow-up to the last one. The track record of local economic development incentives, I think, is at best mixed or unproven. How do you guys evaluate the effectiveness of incentives, especially with a goal like equity and inclusiveness, which is maybe a little open to definition, I suppose?
Thank you.
My question is about design. Design is a crucial aspect of placemaking, and my question is how you see the role of design and work with that community of architects, urban designers, landscape designers, and do they help you get beyond the generic plan?
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Neural Council Member. Question about conflict resolution. So what new practices are there beyond the town hall with hundreds of people waiting for one microphone and in the charrettes that we've seen, and the conflict between not in my backyard versus the projects needing any new thinking there?
Great. And Emmanuel?
And my question was, you touched on this a little bit, Gerben, more along just better ways to, I guess, manage gentrification, because it seems like, especially in the city, if you build something that's an attraction, whether it's a nicer park or a better school, that is going to just drive up those housing costs and those rent prices and force more people to come in. I mean, not force, but more people who want those amenities that can afford them are willing to pay more. So are there any tools or tactics you've seen in managing gentrification to make sure more people can stay in the neighborhoods?
Right, which is very related to Shane's question about, I think, measuring the benefits of these tax incentives.
I would love to add on
Great.
to the end of that commercial rent control.
Oh, sorry. Just adding on to the end of that, tools and methods for preventing gentrification. Any thoughts on commercial rent control?
Please.
Yeah, those are several.
Those are really good questions.
Yeah, great questions. Great questions.
Again, here, there's so many different experiences in different countries too. If we're talking about, affordable housing and rent control, if I look at what Holland is doing and where, for instance, Scandinavia is going, they have big housing corporations to service their, that's where the government gets into. Those are housing corporations with 40,000 to 60,000 units. Make sure that the rent is being kept. Making use of your procurement power if you have enough of those units. So they've been very successful, and they've been able to keep their for instance, their blue collar communities in a good level on that sense. I see that, for instance, in Canada, people are really struggling with how do we keep affordable housing for people that work in our cities. Vancouver is a good example where your core people like policemen, firemen, nurses, doctors cannot afford to live in the city anymore. So how do you deal with that? So those are a lot of policies and also long-term economic flows that I don't have all the answers to that. But what I can tell you is what we've been doing with cities in those aspects. If you start with an existing community, we really try to gentrify, we call it internal gentrification. You take the people and try to, take them in their own development. Once they do better and they can earn a little bit more money, you don't leave as much people behind, less people are unemployed. There's an economic benefit there, and then you create the housing that they can afford in sort of an adaptive way to go to another level. This is also a more long-term plan, but in our cases, they work in our environment. They, because of the work, they can afford better housing. You have to prepare for that as well. Again, you can only do it with collaborating with everybody, but we've been successful in the sense that no more, 80% of the people around our project stayed, and they're in a better situation. And that's actually also, what I'm most proud of. If I leave some of my projects and I see, when we came and 5-6 years later, that people are actually now not unemployed, and they work around our projects, not just me as an employer, but a lot of others. And they're happy, and you can see that they really improved their personal lives. That's one of the best things that you can create as a community developer. But there's always issues that we cannot solve. We're far from perfect, but with a different approach, you can achieve also different things.
So in terms of how do we evaluate impact, I think we don't have yet a great set of definitive metrics. So for me, it is really looking at over the long term, is it sustainable and is it spreading? Right. So is it a one-off? You did one thing and that's great, but can you look around a community and see from that one-off really kind of what Gerben was saying, other impacts, including employment changes. And then on gentrification, I think we still have a lot of work to do on the right policies, and I think you're going to start seeing some convenings of groups to really think through from a policy perspective. Is it rent control? Is it what are the real policies? Nobody's really developed that here. But I do think there are also the other piece to that I think we have to be focused on is, I say this to people all the time. The truth is, when you're trying to do neighborhood development, the fact is I'm trying to raise the property values.
Right.
That's what I want to have happen. And in a true middle-class neighborhood, that's a good thing, right? The problem is that we're improving neighborhoods where people don't have access to that. They don't get to access that benefit because they're underemployed or unemployed, and so the a critical piece of, that's why for me, a critical piece of community and neighborhood development has to be improving people's income levels, right? If we improve a neighborhood, but we don't bring people up in the neighborhood in terms of their wages, then they cannot. But if you bring up their wages, more of them will be able to access the benefits of the neighborhood development. The problem is typically we improve the neighborhood, but we don't help the people in the neighborhood, their ability to access that improvement. So I think we have to think about it a little bit differently, and so we're trying hard to do that. Then I just want to get back to, I don't want to forget your design question. So I just want to touch on it because I do think that the city, particularly Mayor Emanuel, has been very focused on bringing design into some of the work he's doing. And so if you look at the bridges that I talked about, they're not just, they didn't just build a bridge, right? They're kind of amazing. So we just opened the 55th, the CTA invested money in the Garfield Street, Green Line Garfield Station. Go to it. It's amazing. It's really, and I'm blanking on the name of the artist, you would know who did it. But it's incredible, and it will help drive not only that station, but other things that are happening on that corridor. And so absolutely, I think there's a real, you have to have kind of a visionary, you have to have a leader who thinks and pushes it, because I think naturally it doesn't always come up unless you have somebody asking the question, what is it going to look like? But the city has done it a fair amount, and it's had really incredible impact on the outcome of the development. That I think, again, because part of community development is changing people's attitudes. People are used to thinking about their neighborhood in a particular way, and themselves, because we've grossly underinvested in them. And so when you start changing how you invest in them, hopefully what you're also starting to change is how they think about their community and therefore themselves, and they're vested more in that growth and change.
Yeah. These are great questions. I do want to put in a plug for the Bass Center on Transformative Placemaking at the Brookings Institution, where my former colleague Jennifer Vey has just put out a blog that grapples with this exact tension between kind of confusing all placemaking with eventual gentrification, and actually her takeaway is we need more placemaking, not less, if we're concerned about gentrification, because it is about having that long-term vision, the intentionality, the focus on outcomes that include equitable growth and not just runaway growth. And so anyway, there's a lot of people who are grappling with those tensions and thinking about what it means. I know this conversation will continue because cities are constantly changing, and that's part of what it's about. I love where we started, that this is all about creating places people live where they can reinvent themselves forever. That's really nice. I'm going to take that away. So thank all of you for coming out today. Thanks to our panelists. It was a great conversation.
Thank you very much.